Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. More than 200 protesters gathered at the Fort Macleod RCMP detachment demanding the release of freedom activist Alex Van Herk. We will explain what happened. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the UN Secretary General have been visiting the Canadian Arctic. We will tell you why. And a Christian revival is taking place at a large Indigenous reservation. We have a special report with all of the detail.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A short-lived protest outside of the RCMP detachment in Fort Macleod ended in victory on Thursday evening. More than 200 protesters gathered to demand the release of freedom activist Alex Van Herk. He was originally charged with mischief over $5,000 for his involvement in the Coutts border blockade earlier this year. But the Crown imposed an additional condition on Van Herk, ordering him to stay away from longtime friend and Fort Macleod Town Councillor Marco Van Hugenbos. Van Herk refused to sign the condition, and crowds gathered outside demanding his release. The Crown withdrew the condition, and Van Herk was released from the detachment later that evening.
He's not going to let that keep
I refuse to sign, and that's what we've been fighting for the last 3 years, is our charter rights and freedoms, right? Freedom to protest, freedom to assemble, freedom of religion. And I said, that's what's been taken away, and that's why I'm here. It says, had they not taken our charter rights away in the last 3 years, I wouldn't have been in there. And I said, we need to stand up for this. And I feel truly that the constables that were there and the sergeants that arrested me were definitely fighting the same cause, but their hands are tied. But I told them all, here's where we take our stand.
Van Herk adds that it was the support of the people outside of the detachment that made the condition withdrawal possible. He says that police took pictures of the crowd to show him that he had support, and he praised the officers, saying they fought hard to have the condition rescinded. A man who received a 1-month jail sentence a couple of weeks ago for assaults was also given a 2-month sentence after pleading guilty in Lethbridge Provincial Court to assault and possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose. The court was told that 37-year-old Cody Fleming was at the Alpha House homeless shelter last April and threatened staff with a knife. He was previously banned from the shelter from past abusive behavior. He entered the shelter, and when he was asked to leave, he became abusive, aggressive, and pulled the knife, threatening to kill anyone who touched him. Lawyer Claudia Connolly says Fleming realized that he did what was wrong and that he has struggled with mental health issues his entire life. A man from Oregon accused of sexually assaulting a 13-year-old Edmonton girl is facing more criminal charges in the United States. Police say Noah Medrano lured the girl while online, then abducted her and took her across the border in June. The girl was rescued on July 2nd when Medrano was arrested in Oregon City. There were reports that he now faces a total of 8 charges, including kidnapping, 4 sex-related charges, luring, and 2 counts of using a child in display of sexually explicit conduct. Digital ID is becoming more and more commonplace these days. You don't have to look any further than the ArriveCAN app. Now, is digital ID a good thing, or does it really infringe upon our rights and freedoms? John Carpe is president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, and he says giving the government that much power and information can be dangerous.
But if governments can know your political opinions by monitoring your Facebook, and if they can know your spending decisions and where you buy, and if you have a GPS tracking device in the phone, so government knows where every citizen is at every time, it's that centralization that is extremely dangerous. And, you know, the track record in Canada is very poor. It was less than a year ago that all of us were forced, if we wanted to be first-class citizens and just enjoy a normal life, we were forced to disclose personal private medical information about a vaccination status to complete strangers. And if you didn't want to do that, then you were a second-class citizen.
Make sure you catch the full interview with the Justice Centre's John Carpe and BCN's Jeanette Rocher discussing digital ID coming up in the second half of our program. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced a change to his cabinet today. Tanya Farrer takes over from Doug Schweitzer as the Minister for Jobs, Economy and Innovation. She will also continue to serve as the Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction. The vacancy came after Schweitzer resigned from cabinet back in May. He says he will also resign as the UCP member for Calgary Elbow at the end of the month. The Alberta provincial election will take place in May of next year. A big event is coming up in Manitoba next month, where thousands of people will be gathering to rally for our freedoms. The 911 Stand for Canada event will take place September 9th through the 11th on private land in Clandeboye, Manitoba. Marcus Ray is one of the organizers, and he said it should be a peaceful rally with a barbecue, pizza trucks, and guest speakers who will bring a message of hope.
We've got some really good speakers showing up. We've got some live music for the evening time. It's kind of a camping work project is what we call it. We're trying to get as many Canadians together as we can to get opinions, to get us all talking to each other. We believe that our children are in danger. We believe that we as people of Canada are in danger. We're not World Economic Forum fans. And we don't like what's coming down here. It doesn't look good. And to peacefully say this, we're trying to get our police department involved with us to see that there's crimes being committed and that we need something done. We need some action on their part.
More information about the 911 Stand for Canada rally in Manitoba next month will be found on their website fairly soon. Just sayitcanada.ca. Well, it's been kind of a mixed bag when it comes to our weather here in southwestern Alberta lately. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, should we maybe take along an umbrella if we're headed to Whoop Up Days?
Well, it might not be a bad idea, Hal, especially for tonight, because we are looking at partly cloudy skies this evening. There is a 30% chance of showers and then a risk of a thunderstorm early this evening, clearing overnight. Overnight low also 13 degrees into tomorrow, Saturday. Should be a lovely 25 degrees with partly cloudy skies, but windy. So we're looking at wind gusts from 20 to 40 and then 40 to 60 kilometers per hour. So going to be a very windy one. And then in the evening, we're looking at a 60% chance of showers. As for Sunday and the rest of the next week, I'll have that 7-day forecast coming up for you later on in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Whoop Up Days in Lethbridge is close to wrapping up. You know, before it does, make sure you take in some of the four-legged stars of the festival. BCN's Jeanette Rocher spent some time down at Lethbridge District Exhibition this week and came face-to-face with Whoop Up Days' furriest talent.
Well, no Whoop Up Days celebration would be complete without an incredibly talented animal or animals. That includes, we got Twiggy and we got Hollywood, and these are water skiing squirrels, if you can believe that. So their parents are Tony and Chuck, and I want to hear about these squirrels. How do you get these guys to do the crazy things that they do?
So we just train them like you would a dog, just a lot of repetition, and we work with them just to get one lap, and we just increase the laps from there.
Well, we're going from water skiing squirrels to extreme dogs. Come here, look at me. This is Topaz and Topaz's owner, Jen. And Topaz is part of Extreme Dogs. How do you train these dogs? I just have to know this.
So it's a lot of time and effort. The biggest thing that we like to do is we find what the dogs like for a reward. All of us are positive reinforcement trainers. So we let the dogs dictate and choose how they want to be rewarded. Him, for example, he doesn't really care for a toy. So his reward and his motivation comes from pockets full of treats. If I'm asking him to do something a little more difficult, I up the ante and I give him a treat he's never had before. If it's a little bit of steak from last night, or we cook special chicken or meatballs or whatever, we up the ante when we want them to do extreme things.
Well, I can't wait to see the show and see what these dogs are actually going to do, especially you, Topaz. You got a kiss for me? Mm-hmm.
Oh, dear. Yes.
That's so cute. Nothing like the kiss from a pooch. A couple of horses with the Lethbridge Therapeutic Riding Association were in Galt Gardens this afternoon for the Horses in the Park event. The initiative, which takes place 2 Fridays a month, is a chance for some residents to hang out and enjoy some quality time with a horse.
These are therapeutic horses. They are trained for this purpose. The program, again, it's evolved into something quite beautiful. So we come with a range of supports with AHS, with harm reduction, the Indigenous recovery teams, Sage Clan. There's a bunch of organizations that come and are with us as we do this. We provide an opportunity for conversation. So the vulnerable in the park, those who are afflicted with addiction, who are just having a rough time of it, have an opportunity just to be human, just to have joy, the joy of the presence of a horse.
Schreiner says the Horses in the Park program has been taking place since last fall. The new turf at the University of Lethbridge Community Sports Stadium has been installed. Athletes are pretty excited to be playing on the new field. The field turf surface has about 3 times the infill than the old space had and is up to the same standard as CFL turf. Student athlete Keegan Brantner says it's exciting to be playing on a new field.
Super excited. I had my first session in the summer when the turf had just opened, and we were delighted how much bouncier it was and just more comfortable it was for us to run on. Going into my 5th year, it's really exciting actually to get to play on the first year of the new turf and getting to finish my season off on a brand new turf. And it just feels like a new beginning for Pronghorn Athletics and for our women's rugby team, just having a fresh start.
Now, the new area is not just for the university athletes. The Lethbridge Minor Football Association players will use the community stadium as their home field. The president of the group says players were ecstatic to play on it for the very first time.
First thing that they noticed when the field just opened, that we have our logos, and the kids are immediately drawn to go see their future high school logo in the end zone. And you know, the quality is amazing. Yeah, they're just absolutely ecstatic about it, this new stadium.
The total cost for the field renovation was $911,000. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg were in Cold Lake, Alberta today as they wrapped up a visit focused on northern defenses. Thursday, they attended the country's largest Arctic military training operation and toured a radar station in Nunavut. Officials say this is part of Canada's renewed focus on Arctic security in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the expansion of NATO. With Sweden and Finland becoming members, Russia will be the sole Arctic nation outside of the alliance. Now, when the PM was in Nunavut on Thursday, Trudeau said it is very important to continue to invest in our defense.
To make sure that we are able to protect the Arctic and, by extension, North America and indeed NATO. But we can never forget that sovereignty doesn't come through soldiers or scientists. Sovereignty comes with the people who've lived here for millennia. Everything we do here has to be not just in support of them, but drawing on them for support of everything we do. And that's why I'm so pleased to be able to be here at this High Arctic Research Station that is embedded in the community in ways that I think sets the bar very high.
A father of a victim aboard Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 that was shot down by Iranian missiles in 2020 arrived in Ottawa after marching for 2 weeks. He wants to meet with government officials to present a list of demands to get justice for the victims.
Today's message, we say enough is enough. After 958 days passed since our loved one been killed by IRGC, we are here today to asking to make sure you put the killer of our loved one, to put that on the list of the terrorist entities in Canada. Today we are here to apply the Magnitsky sanction for the Iranian official, from Khamenei, the supreme leader, to the Zarif, Shamkhani, and the Hajizadeh, the general of the IRGC, the killer of our loved one, and the other official. 85 Canadian residents been killed. Why the Canadians refuse to open the criminal investigation? The Canadian life is matter. We are here today to send this message to the Canadian government.
In a very rare move, the government in Iran allowed women to attend a soccer game at the Tehran Azadi Stadium in the Iranian capital on Thursday. They had a blast doing so.
خیلی خوشحالیم. همون موقعی که شنیدیم قراره بیان دخترها از خوشحالی گریه می‌کردیم. اما از اینم که نمیتونیم الان بریم تو ناراحتیم. خیلی.
Closer to home, country star Chris Stapleton has spoken out about the deadly and devastating flooding in his home state of Kentucky. Stapleton volunteered in person to help out as massive flooding devastated so many communities.
It was complete and utter devastation, and I don't know what it's going to take to recover from it. It's going to take a lot more than any one individual can do, or going to take a lot of hands. It's going to take a lot of people, and there are people on the ground who've been there a lot longer than I was. I was there for a few days. It's going to take a lot, and it's one of the worst things I've ever seen. You know, it's just heartbreaking. People's homes washed off their foundations miles down the road, you know, and they have nothing. And people looking for their loved ones, and I don't know what the missing and lost count is at this point, but it's very, very tragic.
NASA's new moon rocket will make its debut next week. The Space Launch System is shorter and slimmer than the Saturn rockets that hurled Apollo astronauts to the moon. It's also mightier, packing a whopping 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
We know how we're going to get to the moon. We're still going to have to go through the South Mississippi and New Orleans area to get to the moon. We get to do at Stennis what we love to do, and that's make noise. There's liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. It's both cryogenics. When they come into the main combustion chamber, they immediately go to plus 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and they come out at Mach 13, 13 times the speed of sound as the exhaust. That would take you from New York City to LA in less than 15 minutes.
Healings on social media, deliverance from addictions, and turning people to Christ. Revival is apparently sweeping across parts of Native America. The leaders of the Crow tribe have even passed a resolution to proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord of the Crow Indigenous Reservation. Reporter Mark Martin traveled to Montana to bring us this first-hand look.
In some respects, the plight of Native Americans hasn't changed. They face troubling circumstances with issues ranging from substance abuse to a massive COVID impact to an alarming number of missing and murdered women.
There's a lot of, broken areas, broken communities, and our communities are rampant with drugs.
Yet, in the midst of the suffering, Crow Tribe members Donna Stansoverbull and her husband Russell say God is on the move.
We can feel and sense the rumblings of revival. And when I say revival, I mean people's hearts turning back to God.
We've been having healing revivals over the online church. God's been healing people through social media. People are giving their hearts to the Lord.
The senior pastors of Arrow Creek TVE Church say God called them to start the online fellowship in 2018.
We couldn't even comprehend what that would look like, but God put it on our hearts, and we began to establish Arrow Creek TV. And millennials started coming to the church, and I'm so proud of my congregation. We've got the best. We've got 5 continents represented. We probably represent the biggest church in the Indian community throughout the U.S.
Russell says the Pentecostal roots of revival run deep in his family and the Crow Nation. His mother, Sharon Stansoverbull, is also a pastor and Crow elder. She recalls how in 1906, her grandmother attended the Azusa Street Revival in California.
While they were there, they were privileged to receive the Holy Spirit. And they came back to the Crow Reservation and proclaiming that God is Lord over the Crow Reservation.
Whole communities were touched by the fire of the Holy Spirit, and the Crows eventually became known throughout Indian country as the center for Pentecost.
A revival in another Indigenous community. So cool to see. Well, we enjoyed more seasonal values today in Lethbridge, and not a bad weekend is shaping up as we wrap up Whoop Up Days. A complete look at the weather picture is on deck. Well, it was another beautiful day here in the Windy City. Sunshine mixed with clouds and fairly warm for Whoop Up Days. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it's looking like kind of a mixed bag, so we may have to bring along an umbrella as we wrap up Whoop Up Days on Saturday night.
Yeah, it sure is a mixed bag, Hal, because this evening we're looking at another 30% chance of showers. There is a risk of thunderstorms as well early this evening. Overnight low of 13 into Saturday. Partly cloudy skies, very windy though. We're looking at wind gusts up to 40 and 60 km. 25 degrees the high, but 60% chance of showers Saturday evening. After that, the sun should shine. Wouldn't you know it, just when Whip Up Days is about to end, we're going to see those temperatures climb again. 23 the high on Sunday, high of 27 Monday, climbing all the way up to 29 on Tuesday, and then look what happens after that. We're back up in the middle of summer is what it feels like, with highs of 35 degrees on both Wednesday and Thursday. Wonder if we'll break a record those days. We'll see if it actually gets that hot. Average high for this time of year, according to the almanac, 25 degrees. Average low at 9 degrees. 36 was our record for this day back in 1996. And then in 1980, we had our record low, which was 3 degrees. Sun rose at 6:38 a.m. Sunset this evening at 8:28 p.m., giving us 13 hours and 50 minutes of daylight. Okay, there you go. Let's take a look at the highs across the nation, starting with Victoria. We're looking at a high of 21 degrees tomorrow. There are some scattered showers tomorrow in Victoria. Vancouver seeing partly cloudy skies, also a high of 21 there. 19 the high in Edmonton tomorrow. We're going to see some scattered showers turning into possibility of some thunderstorms. Calgary looking at a chance of showers and the risk of thunderstorms as well, with a high of 20 degrees there. 31 in Saskatoon. Going to be a hot one there, but there is some moisture in the air and the chance of some thunderstorms as well. 29 the high in Regina tomorrow with partly cloudy skies. 24 the high in Winnipeg tomorrow. Winnipeg seeing some showers and the possibility of some thunderstorms as well. 26 the high in Toronto tomorrow. Beautiful sunshine. Sunny skies also in Ottawa. 24 the high there, and a high of 23 expected in Montreal tomorrow, with clear skies, so it's going to be a nice one there. As we look to eastern Canada, Fredericton 22 degrees the high, 23 the high in Halifax. Halifax looking at possibility of some thunderstorms there. Same thing for Charlottetown, rain and thunderstorms, 19 the high there, 25 the high in St. John's, Newfoundland tomorrow under sunny skies. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Losses are piling up on the stock markets on both sides of the border in response to a strong message by the U.S. Central Bank. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says the Fed will likely impose more large interest rate hikes in the months ahead to help ease inflation. The TSX was down more than 200 points earlier today, while the Dow Industrials on Wall Street were down as much as 540 points. Powell is also warning that the Fed's continued tightening of credit will cause pain for many households and businesses, as higher interest rates will further slow the economy and potentially lead to job losses. Drug maker Moderna has filed patent infringement lawsuits alleging that Pfizer and German partner BioNTech copied its technology in order to make the COVID-19 vaccine. Pfizer says it has not fully reviewed Moderna's lawsuit, but was surprised by it, given its vaccine is based on proprietary technology developed by both BioNTech and Pfizer. It says it will defend itself against all allegations in the case. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 299 points on the day to finish at 19,873. The Dow was down 1,008 points to 32,283. The S&P 500 was down 141 on the day to 4,057, and the Nasdaq also took it on the chin, down 497 points to 12,141. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 45 cents to 92.97 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 4 cents to $9.34 US. Gold was down $20.57 to $17.3814 US an ounce. And silver was down 35 cents to $18.90 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $10.85 per bushel. Barley's at $8.03. Canola's at $19.25. And corn is at $11.35 per bushel. Live cattle were down 30 cents to $140.80. Feeder cattle were down $2.05 to $182.20, and lean hogs October contract was down 45 cents to $90.65. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 76.73 US. Recapping one of our top stories, a short-lived protest outside of the RCMP detachment of Fort Macleod ended in victory on Thursday evening. More than 200 protesters gathered to demand the release of freedom activist Alex Van Herk. He was originally charged with mischief over $5,000 for his involvement in the Coutts border blockade earlier this year. But the Crown imposed an additional condition on Van Herk, ordering him to stay away from longtime friend and Fort Macleod Town Councillor Marco Van Hugenbos. Van Herk refused to sign the condition, and crowds gathered outside demanding his release. The Crown withdrew the condition, and Van Herk was released from the detachment later that evening. Is digital ID a good thing or an infringement on our rights and freedoms? John Carpe, president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, will give us his thoughts next. And listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, the Christian church has been around a long time, but how church services are held and how the church functions have certainly changed. So what should it look like in modern times? Well, joining me to discuss this is Kelly Stickle, who is the lead pastor at Parallel Church in Lethbridge. Pastor Kelly, so great to have you on again. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jeanette. It's great to be with you again.
Awesome. Okay, so first of all, many viewers know your church by its former name, right, which was My Victory Church. So why the change, and what's the significance of your new name?
Yeah, well, that's a loaded question, but the big driving force behind that this last 2 years, as you know, and everyone of your viewers is well aware of, was very disruptive in multiple ways, not just with COVID, but with also a lot of the political disruption, a lot of race issues, especially south of the border, and a lot of, I think, a lot more divisiveness in culture as a whole. And I think for us, we wanted to stand out and saying, as a church, Jesus called us to unity. As a church, he called us to separate ourselves from society in many ways. And so we decided, in the midst of all the divisiveness, we wanted to come alongside. And so we chose the name Parallel to say we want to walk with people. We want to come alongside with people and be a voice that is opposite of what is becoming the norm in society today, and divides and divisiveness.
Okay, there you go. That was a loaded question with a loaded answer. Thank you for that. So, Kelly, your church slogan is for love and impact. So I think for years, many churches were known for what they stood against, right? But it's also important to let people know what the church is for. So it sounds like your church wants to be known for love and for having an impact on the community. So maybe you can unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, well, it really stood out to me, John 13, Jesus's conversation with his disciples. It carried on into John 15, of course, where multiple times he said, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you." And when Jesus gave that command, it wasn't an additional command to what we have in the Old Testament. It was in essence a replacement command that is the command that we as Christians are supposed to live by. So we're saying, okay, we're going to love, but we're not just going to love. That's a flowery word in society and misunderstood in many ways, but we're going to love like Jesus loved. And Jesus loved unconditionally. Jesus loved the outcast, those that were considered in his time the unlovable. And he extended love to the point of giving himself and his life in love for his friends, like it says. So we're like, we want to love like that, and we want to follow Jesus' command, but we don't want to just love like that. We want to have an impact in our community with that kind of love as well. And Paul said in Galatians 5:6 that the faith that really matters, the faith that really counts, is the one that expresses itself through love. And that kind of became our guiding verse, saying we're going to impact our community, but we're going to do it the Jesus way and do it with love. And so that, again, we definitely want to be what we're known for, not what we stand against or who we stand against, but we want to be known as a church that comes alongside and loves and impacts.
I think sometimes people who don't regularly attend church might see things through that lens of, us against them, or the church versus society. So what does the church need to do to communicate to others that they are welcome to come as they are, with all their imperfections, without being judged? I mean, people are attending because they want some kind of direction, right?
Yeah, and I think part of the big shift for me, I've been pastoring for over 25 years now, and part of the big shift for me is that I've always pastored and led churches with it in mind of I want to get people in the community to come in to the church. And where I've shifted in many ways and seeing, what Jesus modeled and how Jesus did his ministry, but then also really studying the early church in the first 3 centuries in particular and how they modeled what Jesus instructed them to do. And I realized that, we can't just wait for the community to come to us when they're ready. We really need to go to them. And I know that sounds, cliche and that sounds easy to do, but going, no, wait a second, we put all of our energies, all of our finances, all of our staffing as a church, all of our monies into weekend services and hoping that people are going to show up to that. And we're like, no, wait a second. Let's reposition how we do church, what we think about church, and let's invest more in going to the community throughout the week rather than expecting the community to come to us. So I think the biggest divide has been when we've created the church as a gathering place, a social club that gathers once a week, and saying, no, that's not what we're called to be. We're called to not attend church, we're called to be the church. And so let's go to the community and reach them rather than waiting for them to come to us.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I know on your church website, you actually invite people to these house parties. So what's that all about?
Yeah, well, we looked at everything, all the language we use, and we realized that a lot of the small groups that we have, and small groups is a cliche for a lot of Christians, that people are like, I don't really want to be a small group, and they look at it as a Bible study where one person's going to teach them, and they're not sure if they're going to agree, and they'd have to go with people they don't like. We're like, no, everywhere Jesus went, he threw a party, and it was a lot more about relational connection. Again, studying Jesus's ministry, he was all about the relational connections, and he wanted to go to Zacchaeus' house and have a party, and he never taught it did anything. Just the relational connection led to Zacchaeus' salvation. So we wanted to really emphasize the gathering, especially throughout COVID and all the rest of it. We wanted to really emphasize the relational side of things, and said, hey, let's just rephrase that to house parties. And in the midst of the relationships, it's amazing. The deeper the relationships, the more spiritual the conversations become, and the deeper we can go into scripture when we have relationship and when we have trust. And so we wanted to start with that on that basis first, and then instead of saying small group, hey, let's have a house party, let's gather together, hang out, watch a hockey game if we need to, whatever it's going to take, just to gather.
Yeah, and I'm just curious too, with COVID, I would imagine it was very difficult to do those small groups, those house parties. They were non-existent pretty much, and so it's so nice to open up people's homes again and invite others in. But have you found that attendance is a little bit different ever since that whole pandemic took place? It's like people were in a momentum, COVID happened, and it's like the world just stopped, and so many people's interests have changed. And how have you found that, and how have you dealt with it?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have discovered that there's a difference in attendance. But again, as a pastor, I wasn't panicking to the degree of saying, well, people aren't coming back to the church. It's like when I hear that from pastors and from leaders, I begin to question going, well, again, that weekly social gathering that at a building, is that the church, or is Christians, and how do we reach them? We're reaching them at different levels. So I'm not so worried about, who, is attending or not attending, or how often they're attending, or is our numbers back, pre-pandemic. What I really want to focus on is are we equipping the church to reach them and making a difference and an impact in the community? And our attendance did, take big hits like everybody else's and go through that. Happily, we're right back on track and going again and excited. But our focus as pastors and as leaders has really shifted in saying, okay, let's not put all of our energy into just getting bums in the seat on a Sunday and think that that's church. Let's equip the saints to do the work of the ministry throughout the week.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Kelly, you believe that a church should choose unity over uniformity, right? So, which means like aligning, even if we don't agree on everything. So, that can be a challenge, obviously, when we live in a time like now where there's so much division, as you've been talking about. And of course, we're living in this cancel culture now. So, what does it take to stay in alignment with one another if we see things differently?
Well, I think that's of utmost importance for us as Christ followers to make that a priority because Jesus made it a priority. His final prayer that we have recorded that he prayed over his disciples, he didn't pray, keep them protected. He didn't pray, keep them theologically correct, keep them baptizing the right way, taking communion the right way. He said, make them one. And his main prayer was for unity. So I think as the church, we need to make that as a priority and model that for the rest of the world. Where it comes to unity, not uniformity, is we can value, if we value unity over uniformity, meaning that we don't have to all agree to be in unity. We can be in unity even if we disagree, especially if we disagree. And I think our society as a whole has lost the challenge culture, the willingness to question, the willingness to debate. We've lost that art in some way, and I think that's very dangerous because we have polarizing sides. Everybody's splitting up and going into their own little camps, and I think it's very easy on both sides of the camps to get deceived and to go off the rails too far when we stop challenging and debating and questioning and learning how to do that. I think we need to get back to some of that and saying it's okay to question, it's okay to challenge, it's okay to argue, as long as we value the relationship and the unity over whether or not we agree.
Now, how do you go about handling things when you may have someone who visits your church, but they're opposed to some of the things that you teach and believe in? Do you still welcome them, and do you still offer to help them if they need assistance in some area?
Yeah, absolutely. Without question, we make as much as we possibly can. We work with those who are willing to work with us, regardless of their backgrounds, their beliefs. We have a lot of different backgrounds and different belief systems and a lot of people that have been raised in church, lots that haven't, lots that have been raised in way different denominations or belief systems than what we preach. And so we have a whole bunch of those that come in there, lots from polar opposite sides, politically, polar opposite sides, religion, when it comes to religion and belief systems, all of that. And yet we are able to work and do that. And part of that is just setting a culture to say, hey, we're going to value unity over agreeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we tend to meet as we normally do in church buildings, and you were kind of alluding to this earlier, and we're encouraged to invite people to join us. However, the early church also did a lot of taking the church to where people are instead of having them come to a church building, like what you were saying earlier. So what does that look like in today's culture?
Well, I think the church needs to take its job back in many ways. Where what I mean by that is the way that the early church got into the community is that, and you see it right in the book of Acts right away, and then doing historical studies of some of the practices of the early church, especially in the first 3 centuries. The early church was known for Romans would write about the church, and what they were known for is their care of the least of these. It was their care for the needy. And they would, in Acts chapter 2, there was no need among them. It's repeated in Acts chapter 4, right? They shared with everything. Everyone had everything in common. There's no need among them. They made sure that there was no need in their vicinity, and the church would reach out into the community and help the widows and the orphans and the poor and feed the hungry. And the church actually historically grew the greatest in the 3rd century. So it entered the year 200 with 200,000 Christians estimated on the planet. By the year 300 AD, there was 6 million Christians on the planet. In the midst of all that, what happened? Well, in 249, there was what's called the Cyprian plague that lasted 20 years and wiped out a fifth of the Roman Empire. What's fascinating is in the midst of that plague, it was Christians that went in. The church went in, ministered to the sick and to the dying. Many of them died themselves, but in that, they offered hope when the rest of society was hopeless. And because of that, the church grew. And I think that's where we got to take our job back and get into the community and find needs in our community. And it should be the church that steps up and feeds the hungry, gives water to the thirsty. All the things that Jesus said in Matthew 25 are still great needs today. And I think we need to step up and take that job back.
Well said. It looks like we're almost out of time, but Kelly, any final thoughts on where today's church should be heading and what we need to do to be more effective in touching people's lives?
I'm more excited than ever with the church, the conversations that I'm having with pastors, with leaders, with where the church is at. I think, we can look at, COVID as the great disruptor, but I really think we're going to look back in history and saying it was the great revealer, where I think a lot of us as pastors or leaders are asking the right questions, having the right conversations. And I think the church of the future, I'm more excited about the church of the future than I've ever been. And excited that it's stepping up and taking its job back and being more than just a weekly gathering.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Pastor Kelly. Really appreciate having you on once again.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeanette. It's great.
Absolutely. Kelly Stickle is the pastor at Parallel Church in Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching. There is much talk about the benefits of Canada implementing a digital ID system for Canadian citizens. It would be more efficient and convenient, but there are concerns about the freedoms and privacy of citizens and potential government overreach. Our guest today joins us from Calgary. John Carpe is the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. John, welcome back to Bridge City News. Great to have you on again.
Glad to be with you.
Great. So, John, can you first of all explain what digital ID for Canada would entail and how would this function and why are many people wanting to see this happen?
So basically, it's a shift from the paper or hard copy things like your driver's license, your credit card, possibly your passport. Most of us, by the time you're 20 years old, you've got a quarter inch of different cards in your wallet. And so the digital ID is, and you see a lot of it already in place, that people, they want to buy a coffee, they want to go to the gym, they just use their phone and phone gets scanned and blip. You don't even have to take out a credit card to insert your credit card. You've got the quick payment. And it is more convenient, but if it's not done right, it could be extremely dangerous.
Yeah, I would say so. I think one of the worries is government overreach. So, I mean, if I understand it correctly, digital ID would maybe allow governments to know where you've been, what you buy, how you spend your money. Is that true? And if it is the case, then should we trust our government with that information? What's the track record so far for our Canadian government?
Well, 11 months ago, we saw vaccine passports imposed in every province in Canada. And if you were not willing to disclose personal, private medical information to a total stranger at a restaurant or at a gym or at a movie theater, you were very quickly turned into a second-class citizen. So the governments did abuse it with this vaccine passport system, even after the vaccine manufacturers had stated publicly that the vaccine does not stop the spread. And still the government bulldozed ahead and said, well, we got to have vaccine passports. And if you're not injected with the COVID vaccine, or if you refuse to disclose your vaccine status, you're a second-class citizen. You can't go to participate in sports or go to a restaurant. So that was very dangerous. We also saw governments freezing bank accounts earlier this year. So Canadians that donated $50 or $20 to the peaceful truckers protest, suddenly bank account frozen, can't use your credit card. So the track record of governments here in Canada is that they will very aggressively abuse technology to violate our rights and our freedoms and even our property, like the money that we have in the bank.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. I know China is currently using a digital ID system. So maybe can you give us some examples of how China is using, or I guess some would say abusing, the power of digital ID with their citizens?
So China has what's called a social credit system. This is not the political party that used to be in power in BC and Alberta, but credit for good behavior. So if you say something nice about the government on Facebook and say the government's doing a good job, your credits go higher. If you jaywalk, if you cross the street on a red light, there's a centralized national database, and it will take your photo, match up your face to the hundreds of millions of other people, and you'll just get notified on your phone that you are getting fined, and the fine that you have to pay for jaywalking, and your social credit score gets lowered. So if there are people in China who oppose the regime or criticize the regime, they have a lower social credit score. They cannot get onto a train or an airplane or even a bus, because everywhere you go, you need to scan that phone, and the QR code tells the bus or the airplane or the train that you can't get on, because the government has decided that you're not a good citizen, you've been critical of the government, so you will be punished by being denied access to transportation. So you're going to be confined to within walking distance of your own home.
Oh,
And even shopping malls require you to flash that digital ID, the electronic ID. Nothing stops Canada from having the same social credit system that communist China has.
That is really scary. Talk about being ostracized too. And I think many would argue that Canada is not China and therefore would not behave that drastically. However, what could this mean for those who maybe don't follow the government line with their opinions, like say with vaccine mandates, like you mentioned before, or attending a protest with the threat of having your bank account frozen or your voting habits, et cetera? What would that mean?
Well, the thing to avoid is the centralization of the data. So it's not abnormal that the government has data about us. For example, the police would, if they know your name and your date of birth, they can do a search, and the police will know whether or not you have a criminal record, and if yes, what crimes you were convicted of. But only the police have that knowledge on a criminal record. Now, doctors have access to a computerized database, and they can look up a patient history of treatments and surgeries and medications and reports and whatnot. Now, as long as these are separate, we're doing okay. But it becomes a problem if police have access to my medical records, or if the doctor has access to criminal justice and court records. Then you've got a centralization. So governments to have some data on citizens. Obviously, we have tax records, so governments know how much money you earn and you pay income tax. I'm sure for you and for me and for everybody listening, if once you're over 18 or over 25, like the government will have tax records matched up to your social insurance number. Not a problem necessarily. But if governments can know your political opinions by monitoring your Facebook, and if they can know your spending decisions and where you buy, and if you have a GPS tracking device in the phone, so government knows where every citizen is at every time, it's that centralization that is extremely dangerous. And the track record in Canada is very poor. It was less than a year ago that all of us were forced, if we wanted to be first-class citizens and just enjoy a normal life, we were forced to disclose personal private medical information about a vaccination status to complete strangers. And if you didn't want to do that, then you were a second-class citizen. So we've already been there. I don't know why somebody would not be concerned about the future when we've just had this nightmare only 11 months ago.
Yeah, that's such a. Now, could this digital ID system, John, could it keep track of your views, like your political views or your opinions on certain social issues? Does it have the power to do that?
It's very easy for once things are centralized, right? Which is what we want to avoid. We cannot stop governments from keeping, tax records or police records or maybe a record of your traffic violations if you get a lot of speeding tickets and your insurance rates go up. We cannot stop governments from having some data on us. But once it's centralized, it becomes very easy for the, let's say, some human rights commissioner will say, well, we've seen you post things on Facebook or Twitter or on your personal, webpage that we deem to be hateful. So, we're going to punish you by denying you access to restaurants or to certain stores. The technology is there, and I'm not sure Canada's culture is that different from China's. When we saw, for example, in February, the federal government falsely and without any basis declare a national emergency just because there were some peaceful protesters in Ottawa and trucks that may have been illegally parked, and on that basis they actually declared a national emergency and froze people's bank accounts. That is Canada.
Wow. John, how far away are we from possibly seeing this digital ID be put into use in Canada? What's the timeline?
Well, you've probably heard the story of the frog in the boiling water, and the story is told, I don't know if it's true, but the story is told that if you toss a frog into hot water, it will immediately jump out and it knows there's a danger. But supposedly, if you put the frog in cold water and put the cold water on the stove and then heat it up slowly, the frog will boil to death because it doesn't notice the slow changing in temperature. So I think a full-fledged totalitarian nightmare, could take 2 or 3 years before that becomes a reality. But it's going to be done step by step by step. And the federal government has stated publicly that they want to move ahead with digital ID. So Canadians need to contact their members of parliament and say no to digital ID. And, politicians mostly are followers, not leaders. When they hear from the people, they very often will change their minds and will do what the people want.
Okay, so the best thing viewers can do is contact their politicians, their local MPs.
There's a background report, and the information on this is pretty easy to find on the internet. If you Google, what is digital ID, and these sorts of things. Earlier this month, the Justice Centre released a report called Canada's Road to Beijing, and it's on our website at www.jccf.ca. That's Justice Centre Constitutional Freedoms, jccf.ca. And the report is there that kind of goes through what digital ID is and how it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for that, John. I'm going to switch gears here for a second here because we're looking at back to school really quickly. Now, can you give us maybe an update on what's happening with some colleges and universities still insisting that students need to be vaccinated in order to attend classes? Any updates there?
The Justice Centre has taken several colleges and universities across Canada to court over the trying to pressure young, healthy adults into last year was 2 shots, and now they're actually pressuring young, healthy adults who are not threatened by COVID to get a booster shot, like a 3rd shot. And this is just absolutely outrageous because the vaccine manufacturers have said publicly that the vaccine does not stop the spread. So it should just be a personal decision. And there's more and more evidence is coming out about the harmful effects of vaccines, such as myocarditis. If you're a healthy 20-year-old your risk of harm from the vaccine could be higher than your risk from COVID, but that's a decision that every individual should make for him or herself. These are publicly funded, taxpayer-funded institutions, and we're representing students to take them to court over these policies.
Okay, interesting. And John, also the Justice Center has also launched a court application alleging that Alberta's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, withheld information regarding Alberta lockdowns.
Yeah, the Justice Center filed a court action in late 2020 against the Alberta government, seeking to challenge lockdowns for violating our rights and freedoms. The government successfully stalled on presenting evidence, but when we finally got Chief Medical Officer Dr. Dina Hinshaw. We were cross-examining her, questioning her under oath in April of 2022. So the government stalled very successfully for a year and a half. She said that she had no knowledge, no evidence of masks harming school children, when it was her policies that it was mandatory for children in schools, even elementary school kids had to wear masks. Now, in a different court action, it became clear that the Alberta government had a memo that was written to Dr. Dina Hinshaw and to Premier Kenney, and it was a memo that said that there's not much evidence that masks are useful, and there is evidence that they could be very harmful for children for their social development, their mental, their psychological, their emotional development. And yet, when Dina Hinshaw was questioned in the Justice Center's court action, she said she had no knowledge of any, negative reports. It appears that she lied under oath, and so we are reopening the court case to ask her more questions and follow up and try to get to the bottom of this. I mean, did she lie to the people of Alberta and to the court when she said that she had no knowledge of harmful effects of masking?
Okay, interesting. Should be very interesting to see what happens there. John, thanks so much for being with us today. Appreciate having you on.
Thanks for having me on your show. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. John Carpe is the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms.